Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the subcommittee holding this hearing. I appreciate all the witnesses being here. There's a lot of expertise here today, and I appreciate your time and good counsel. Since 1998, Congress has reauthorized legislation like this every 5 years, continually making changes to these laws. And they seem to get more and more complicated. As a lawyer who spent a number of years in private practice, I can certainly say that these laws are among the most complicated laws that the legal system faces, and indeed courts struggle to interpret them. The question I'd like to ask the panel is rather than continually adding conditions, adding mandates, adding complexity, is there not a path we could go on to subtract from the complexity, to make it simpler, to allow free negotiations between large, mature, competitive industries? These are not startups anymore. These are mature industries. And I'd welcome the panel's collective views on if the direction, the one-way ratchet of more and more complexity, more and more burdens, can be turned the other way.
Senator Cruz, if I may, we've testified that we just soon see it go. We're very anxious to keep our signals on satellite. We want people to get our content. We want to be fairly compensated. We have the ability to negotiate for that. For us, STELA is, but I will repeat, there are some that would be orphaned that should be permanently made available. But for us, the 5-year STELA is like every 5 years, it's a chance to harpoon the broadcasters when they swim by. There's nothing in it for us here. This is just what we can take away from broadcasters, what we can add to in terms of more burdensome regulation.
Senator, at TiVo, our view is that there shouldn't be anything by way of additional legislation. Our view is that, just to your point, there ought to be a way for industries to work this out on a voluntary basis, that if the existing regulatory regime that applies to this area is lifted after the industries have been told, look, go work this out, make sure there's competition for consumers, make sure there's a non-burdensome standard for cable operators, make sure there's a good way for the kind of technology that we deliver easily ported for cable operators. That can probably be done relatively quickly, and as a result, we don't see any need for legislation to address this area at all.
I would say, Senator, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Matt.
Just to the point about adding burdens to broadcasters, in 2010, the reauthorization actually required people to take their local broadcast signals if they wanted to continue receiving these distance signals. So with respect to the satellite provisions alone, I would dispute the notion that somehow they're particularly aimed at broadcasters or at reducing their rights or reducing their carriage. On the complexity point, we were talking about this earlier with Senator Ayotte as well, and I think that there are ways to reduce the complexity, but as I said in my testimony, not piecemeal, not to simply say, well, let's let this statutory license expire and see what happens, but rather to overhaul copyright entirely. And Chairman Rockefeller talked about the communications rewrite that's always just around the corner. I'm sure the copyright rewrite is always just around the corner too, but that's the kind of path we would like to see as a comprehensive solution rather than just letting certain provisions go away.
Senator, recently I testified in the House on the future of telecom regulation, and the entire theme of the testimony was simplicity, is what we titled it. I'd commend it to you, be happy to send it to your office, because I do think we're dealing with a statutory regime that's 750,000 words, and is premised at a time and a place where the market was radically different than it is today. Just by virtue of one illustration, 92 Cable Act, the cable industry represented well over 90% of all multi-channel video production. Today we represent only 50%. Back then we were vertically integrated, over 50 or 60% with content. Today that's down to less than 12% of content. Yet there are many rules that are still built on those underlying premises. The bottom line is there are a lot of companies that can take care of their own interests, and the market is fast-moving and innovative. It's why we raise questions about provisions like must-buy, which really provide a unique advantage to one set of very significant companies. By the way, if it's so harmful, 50% of the market aren't subject to the rule. All of the third and fourth largest providers in the country aren't subject to the must-buy rule yet. The cable industry is. These are prunings that need to happen to simplify and better level the playing field.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, my time's expired, but if I could ask one additional question, which, and this is addressed to Mr. Lake, after there was a large public outcry and a significant outcry from Congress, the FCC has announced that it's discontinued its plans with regard to its critical information needs study, which would have inserted government observers into newsrooms. Mr. Lake, what I would ask you today, and let me say I was one of those deeply concerned about that proposed plan, can you assure this committee today that the FCC has no intention to go forward with this kind of inquiry, either through the CIN or any other similar course?
I should say that the intrusion into the newsrooms was not an intended aspect of that study. When that issue was brought to the Commission's attention, it did abandon the study, and I know of no plans to continue with a study of that type.
Well, thank you, and let me encourage you in having no plans to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.